over the weekend, horrific attack, massacre in Buffalo, New York, according to the Associated Press. A white 18-year-old wearing military gear and live streaming with a helmet camera opened fire with a rifle at a supermarket in Buffalo, killing 10 people, wounding 3 others Saturday in what authorities described as a racially motivated violent extremism attack. Police said he shot 11 black and 2 white victims before surrendering to authorities in a rampage he broadcast live on the streaming platform Twitch. Later, he appeared before a judge in a paper medical gown and was arraigned on a murder charge. According to police, this was very clearly a racial attack, a racially motivated attack. This shooter, this mass shooter, we don't mention the names of mass shooters on the program. This mass shooter put out a 180-page manifesto before doing what he was doing. Here's the police explaining what exactly was going on here.
This was pure evil. It was straight up racially motivated hate crime from somebody outside of our community, outside of the city of good neighbors, as the mayor said, coming into our community and trying to inflict that evil upon us.
The suspected gunman specifically went to an area that was heavily black, and that is according to his manifesto. The gunman shot 4 people outside the store, 3 fatally, according to the Buffalo Police Commissioner Joseph Gramaglia. Inside the store, security guard Aaron Salter, retired Buffalo police officer, fired multiple shots. A bullet hit the gunman's bulletproof armor but had no effect, according to the police chief. The gunman then killed the guard, according to the commissioner, and stalked through the store, shooting other victims. Police entered the store. They confronted the gunman in the vestibule. He put his rifle to his own neck. Officers talked him into dropping the gun, and then he surrendered. Okay, so naturally, this has prompted all sorts of soul searching about what prompted this attack, what was behind this attack. The one thing that we definitely know is that once again, the authorities fail to take dangerous people off the streets and keep them off the streets. According to NBC News, the 18-year-old man suspected of killing 10 people and injuring 3 others at a Buffalo, New York supermarket on Saturday had been previously investigated for making a violent statement. The suspect was investigated by New York State Police last year for making a threatening statement in June when he was a minor, according to a law enforcement official. The threat was about wanting to carry out a shooting, according to a different senior law enforcement official. Apparently, it was a school shooting. A state police spokesman, who did not release a name to NBC News, said the subject of the investigation had been transported to the hospital for a mental health evaluation at the time and was not charged with the crime. Buffalo Police Commissioner Joseph Gramaglia said the suspect was evaluated and released and no further complaints were made. He said there was nothing picked up on state police intelligence, nothing picked up on FBI intelligence. He said police are limited in how far they can take investigations and in monitoring social media, saying not everything constitutes a violation of the law. Gramaglia said it would be a lengthy investigation on both the federal and local levels. So once again, this is somebody with a bevy of red flags attached to him. And once again, the bevy of red flags did not result in somebody being taken off the streets who was about to perpetrate a horrific crime in the murder of well over 10 Americans in Buffalo, New York. So, our law enforcement officials, they've not been given either the statutory power to take people off the streets who are dangerous to themselves or others for any protracted period of time, or they don't have the wherewithal to do so. But once again, most Americans are going to look at this and they are going to say, how is our system continuing to fail us? How many red flags have to go off for how many red shooters before we start to say that law enforcement needs to be given further tools and further resources to do its job? Because that's really the only solution to this. Naturally, the left immediately swiveled from focus on red flags and mental health issues, and they focused immediately into the idea that because this shooter was a white supremacist, therefore the entire right is guilty of white supremacy. And this is the shtick of the media. Everyone I don't like is responsible for mass shootings. Now, the peg that they are trying to hang their hat on here is the fact that this guy was a devotee of the so-called great replacement theory. Now, what the left is trying to do is broaden out the term great replacement theory to include any sort of normal concerns about illegal immigration, any suggestions that demographic voting patterns make a difference, which of course, everybody both left and right knows that they do. I mean, the left has been claiming for literally as long as I've been alive, changing demographic patterns in the United States were going to shift the politics of the country in a progressive direction. This is the base of Roy Teixeira's The Emerging Democratic Majority in 2003. So if you want to talk about the great replacement theory and what this person actually thought, you have to actually read the manifesto, and you actually have to know what the great replacement theory is. The great replacement theory is the theory that essentially there are a bunch of Jewish elites, and this coterie of Jewish elites wishes to pervert the racial stock of a country like the United States, a predominantly white country, in order to weaken the country from within. That is the great replacement theory. It is not concerns about illegal immigration. It is not concerns about cultural assimilation. The great replacement theory is the idea there can never be cultural assimilation. The great replacement theory is the idea that racism, that race is destiny. In fact, the racial essentialism of great replacement theory looks a lot more like wokeism than it does like mainstream conservatism or mainstream liberalism. Neither of the two major Democratic parties is a believer that simply because you are of a particular race, this means that you are inherently genetically designed in order to vote a particular way. That is relegated to the wokest left, and it's relegated to the white supremacist right, who sort of join hands in this belief that we can look at your race and know inherently how you are going to vote and how your kids are going to vote and how your grandkids are going to vote. But basic concerns over illegal immigration and how that shifts voting patterns, that is not the great replacement theory. Concerns about whether new immigrants to the United States are going to assimilate to the American way of life, that's not the great replacement theory. So what the left is trying to do is take the classical great replacement theory, a neo-Nazi white supremacist theory, and then conflate that with all of these other normal concerns, and then say, if you have those concerns, you are part of the movement that led to this mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. And it's very obvious they're doing this, and they're doing it for a political purpose. And again, you don't have to be an expert in this sort of stuff to understand that what the media are doing about this is lying. So, I mean, for example, if you look at the actual manifesto of the shooter, and the only reason I'm bothering to look at the manifesto of the shooter is if you're going to, in the media, cover the manifesto and then ignore what the manifesto actually says, I'm going to have to correct the record. This is a direct quote from the manifesto. Are you conservative? No, conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it. Are you a neo-Nazi? I support neo-Nazism. Okay, like this is not a person who considered himself a typical conservative. This is not somebody who was worried specifically about just voting patterns. This is somebody who's worried about the racial stock of the United States being, because he's a white supremacist. That is a different thing. So what the left attempts to do is, of course, conflate all of these concerns and then say that you are responsible for this attack. If you're concerned about the fact that there are going to be 18,000 illegal immigrants who are going to be joining us on the border every day, according to the Department of Homeland Security at the end of Title 42, this means that you are now an incipient white supremacist, or at least an inspiration to white supremacists everywhere. And apparently, the entire media and Democratic Party have decided to mirror this perspective. So, for example, you have Nancy Pelosi yesterday. She was specifically asked on CNN whether right-wing figures share responsibility for the attack. Now, I don't remember anyone from CNN asking if Bernie Sanders shared responsibility for the congressional baseball attack. The congressional baseball shooter literally was spouting Bernie Sanders when he went and shot people. And I said at the time, Bernie Sanders is not responsible for this. The BLM shooter who killed several Dallas police officers in 2016, Barack Obama was not responsible for that shooter. It turns out that in order for people to be responsible for other people committing acts of heinous violence, they have to be espousing acts of heinous violence against other human beings. But this is not the media model. The media model, because the goal here is shut up, the media model is, if I disagree with you, you're now responsible for mass shootings. Therefore, we have to stop you because your words are causing violence. So here is Dana Bash on CNN basically just feeding up softballs to Nancy Pelosi. Are your political opponents responsible for the mass murder of black people in a Buffalo, New York supermarket?
The racist purported manifesto is based on the really repugnant white supremacist idea that people of color are replacing white people in the United States. And as you know, this isn't just a fringe theory on the corner of the internet. It's being pushed by right-wing media personalities and some political figures. What do you say to them? And do they share any responsibility in this attack?
It's so horrible, and it's a horrible way to wake up on Sunday for these families to face that reality and to have it be part of a philosophy in our country, as you described.
It's part of a philosophy in our country, according to Nancy Pelosi and Dana Bash. And I got to say, this is really gross because, again, there is no mainstream part of the political movement in this country that believes that there is a Jewish conspiracy to degrade the racial stock of the country by shipping in brown people. Normal concerns about illegal immigration or cultural assimilation and immigration, that is not just the United States. That is common in Europe. That is common in Japan. That's common literally everywhere on the planet. There are concerns about immigration. Conflating those things is an attempt to destroy your political opposition through attribution of views that people do not actually hold. But this is exactly what the left is going to do now, because they do this all the time. And when there was a shooting at a Walmart that targeted Latinos, a white supremacist targeted Latinos at a Walmart in Texas, you remember there was an attempt to pin that on the entire right. When Gabby Giffords, the Arizona congresswoman, was shot by a deranged nut, the attempt was Sarah Palin is responsible for this, and so is the broad-scale Republican rhetoric. But when it turns out that a left-wing violent person does a left-wing violent thing, then we have to make sure that we definitely wouldn't want to attribute this person's views to anybody else, even if they're deliberately citing those views. We definitely wouldn't want to do that. It's not just Nancy Pelosi. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, he did the same thing. He suggested that this is all because of Fox News. Now, again, the manifesto contains no mention of Fox News, like none. It's 180 pages long. It contains a bevy of sources this person said that he trafficked in, including the Daily Stormer, which is an actual neo-Nazi site. But according to the left, it's all Fox News, of course.
There's two really frightening phenomena that are happening in this country right now. The first is the normalization of racism, right? You have racist ideology and speech now embedded inside major American institutions, the Republican Party, the former president's political operation, Fox News, and it is fueling a level of violence that we have never seen before.
It's an incredible lie. It's just an incredible lie that because there are Republicans who are concerned about illegal immigration, or because there are Republicans who are concerned about progressive voting patterns that Democrats brag about. They brag about this. The so-called browning of America, which is something I've said I don't care about, because I don't care about that. I care about how people vote. I care about how people assimilate. I care about how people reflect American values in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. I've said this stuff very openly, very clearly, many, many, many times. But the idea here is that if you care about any of those things, then you are part of the Great Replacement Theory. In fact, you have Wesley Lowery over on CNN attempting to attribute this shooter to views like mine. Now, in a second, I will show you how stupid this is, because it really is like provably idiotic. But here's Wesley Lowery, who used to report for the Washington Post.
The stuff Tucker and Laura Ingraham say every night, it could be written by white supremacists very often. There's a section of this manifesto where the shooter starts talking about, people always say diversity is strength. How is it strength? I could hear it in Tucker's voice. He says this all the time, right? But the Ben Shapiros of the world say this. There's a big chunk about the idea of genetic differences that could have been pulled from an Andrew Sullivan column, right? There are plenty of people in our politics, in our media, who advance these ideas and advance them frequently.
It's Andrew Sullivan, too. Okay, and for some reason, my name gets mentioned in connection with the Great Replacement Theory, despite the fact that I have never and would never propagate the actual Great Replacement Theory, because not only is it ridiculous and stupid in every facet, also it suggests that Jews are responsible for all the world's problems. Okay, there's a picture of me in this manifesto, not as somebody who's inspiring the shooter, but as one of the genetic types of Jew who controls the world. Okay, this is an actual picture from the manifesto in which there's a picture of me and it's labeled the rat. But according to Wesley Lowery over at CNN, this is because people like me are inspiring this sort of thing. Again, the goal here is everyone I don't like is responsible for mass shootings, so they all have to shut up. Right? I'm literally in the manifesto next to Peter Beinart, who I think is despicable. Right? I think Peter Beinart is awful, but Peter Beinart has sort of a similar look, I guess. And so the idea is that we both look like rats because we are both Jews, and therefore we are both proponents of the idea that the racial stock of the United States must be degraded by bringing in quote-unquote inferior peoples. That's what this actual shooter says. And the idea from Wesley Lowery is that Tucker's saying that, and I'm saying that, which is nuts. Okay, this is just crazy towns. But again, when you understand the goal here, which is perverse and sick, which is to lump in white supremacist shooters with anyone who is mainstream right, you get it. Abby Phillips did the same thing on CNN. She blamed Tucker. She blamed Fox News. Here we go.
If you watch Fox News, this is the mainstay of their primetime hours. Tucker Carlson discusses it in sometimes euphemistic form, but not really all that euphemistic. What does this country do about the way in which this idea of white replacement has just become part of our politics?
Oh, it's just become part of our politics that whites are being replaced. Okay, again, which argument are you making? So the goal here for the left is to make the Great Replacement Theory cover everything. And that way, everything I don't like is the Great Replacement Theory, and it must be stopped because it's dangerous. So, for example, you have a piece from the Daily Beast. This one is by the odious Wajahat Ali. And I say odious because he's intellectually odious. He's really, really dishonest. In which he says Republicans and the conservative media ecosystem have to answer for blood on their hands. Either through innuendo or direct statements, they continue to promote the white supremacist Great Replacement Theory, which has yet again radicalized the terrorists to commit violence against people of color, and they should be held accountable for their role in it. According to Wajahat Ali, it's clear from the shooter's alleged manifesto that the Great Replacement Theory, which is now a mainstream GOP talking point, continues to radicalize men to commit violence. And yet some Republican leaders and conservative pundits continue to promote this hate for the sake of votes, profit, and ratings. Enough is enough. So first of all, let me just make also clear that the left's demographic arguments have been completely wrong. So they've been arguing for several decades that as more brown people enter the country, there will be a demographic move in favor of progressive voting. And as the Hispanic voting patterns right now are showing, that's absolutely untrue. But back to Wajahat Ali's garbage column, he says, until Republican leaders and conservative media stars explicitly renounce this white supremacist conspiracy, condemn it, and disassociate from its peddlers, it's fair to conclude they are entirely complicit with its message. And so he says that every Republican elected official must be asked the following questions. Quote, do you believe in the replacement theory? Do you condemn the replacement theory? Or do you support the ideology that has inspired numerous mass terrorists? If you do condemn it, then why are you and your colleagues repeating it? Okay, so here is the thing. He then, several paragraphs down, actually describes the quote unquote great replacement theory. And the great replacement theory, he says that half of Republican voters support it, which is not true. Half of Republican voters are concerned about illegal immigration and or cultural assimilation by immigrants. That is not the same thing as the quote unquote great replacement theory. But somewhere down here in the article, he actually does acknowledge the nature of what the great replacement theory actually is, which is a Jewish conspiracy theory, right? That the Jews are actively attempting to replace. It's the Jews will not replace us language that you saw people chanting at Charlottesville. So how many Republicans actually believe that stuff? The answer is pretty much none. But if you broaden out great replacement theory to include everyone who has legitimate concerns about immigration, then this means that everyone who has concerns about immigration has to be silenced because, after all, they might be incipient mass shooters. So, for example, you have Talia Lavin, who writes for Rolling Stone and who is just awful. Talia Lavin, you'll recall, was complicit. Well, actually, it was her fault that there was a border patrol agent who ended up being fired because she misidentified a tattoo on him as a neo-Nazi symbol. And the guy ended up losing his job. So now she's back for more. And she has a piece at Rolling Stone titled, "The Buffalo Shooter Isn't a Lone Wolf. He's a Mainstream Republican." She says there's no such thing as a lone wolf, an appellation often given in error to terrorists who act alone, particularly those of the white supremacist variety. There are only those people who, fed a steady diet of violent propaganda and stochastic terror, take annihilatory rhetoric to its logical conclusion. There's never a lone wolf? Weird, because I feel like she wouldn't extend this logic to, for example, the several $billion in property damage done by Black Lives Matter rioters. I feel like she wouldn't do this with regard to, say, radical Islamist terrorists. But when it comes to a white supremacist who is making a pretty distinctive claim in his manifesto, we have to ignore the distinctive claim in the manifesto, and we have to pretend that Republicans at broad scale are supporting this sort of stuff. You have the same thing from the Washington Post today. The Washington Post, piece by Mariana Sotomayor, has a piece titled, "Stefanik Echoed Racist Theory Allegedly Espoused by Buffalo Suspect." And then this was passed around the internet like wildfire, this particular piece, because, again, it is a very, very convenient argument that you see people on the left making, which is that Republicans are the ones who are truly responsible for all of this. Republicans are, okay, here is the thing. It's not true. Okay, in just 1 second, we'll get to what Elise Stefanik actually said. What Elise Stefanik actually said is not, in fact, a great replacement theory knockoff. Okay, here's what Elise Stefanik actually said. Okay, she said, a serious Facebook ad she published in September of 2021 by her campaign committee. It said, radical Democrats are planning their most aggressive move yet, a permanent election insurrection. Their plan to grant amnesty to 11 million illegal immigrants will overthrow our current electorate and create a permanent liberal majority in Washington. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're a Democrat, you've been spending the last several years claiming that Republicans are attempting to suppress the minority vote. And this is horrifying because they're suppressing the minority vote in order to suppress Democratic votes. This is an argument made by Democrats. So, question, how can you simultaneously argue that Republicans are attempting to suppress the minority vote in order to stop Democrats from voting, and also Republicans are racist for identifying minorities with Democrats? You're going to have to square that circle. But the idea here is that this is all part of the broader theory that is propagated by the right. Again, another article by Paul Farhi over at the Washington Post. Conservative media is familiar with the Buffalo suspect's alleged theory. The suspect in Saturday's killing of 10 people at a Buffalo supermarket allegedly wrote a document endorsing great replacement theory, a once fringe racist idea that became a popular refrain among media figures like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham of Fox News and conservative writer Ann Coulter. The theory was once confined to far-right white extremists who cast immigration as a plot by the elites to take political and economic power away from white people. It has gained broader circulation in recent years as a talking point among prominent conservative media figures. Again, the basic attempt as always, is just conflate it. Conflate everything. And if you conflate everything, then the idea is that you are now responsible for mass shootings. So ignore what the guy actually said in his manifesto and just kind of make up what you wish he had said in his manifesto so that you could claim that he's a mainstream Republican. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.